What if I told you that one of the most ancient texts in human history, the Book of Genesis, might contain the secret to healing diseases that modern medicine still struggles with today? And what if this secret was deliberately removed or obscured over centuries of translation and interpretation? Stay with me, because what you're about to discover could fundamentally change how you think about your health. And hey, if you're ready to explore these hidden connections between ancient wisdom and modern wellness, hit that subscribe button right now. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming. Let's start with something that might shock you. When scholars began translating the oldest versions of Genesis from their original Hebrew and Aramaic texts, they noticed something strange. Certain passages about plants healing and the relationship between humans and the natural world were either shortened, modified, or completely removed in later translations. Why would anyone do this? The answer might have everything to do with control, power, and yes, money. In the original Hebrew text of Genesis, there's an extraordinary emphasis on something called the Tree of Life. Now you've probably heard about the Tree of Knowledge of Good and Evil, right? Everyone knows that story. But the Tree of Life gets mentioned too, and here's where it gets interesting. In Genesis chapter 2 verse 9, both trees are introduced together in the Garden of Eden. But while the Tree of Knowledge gets all the attention in Sunday school lessons, the Tree of Life is barely discussed. Some biblical scholars argue this wasn't accidental. The Tree of Life, according to ancient rabbinical texts and early Christian writings, wasn't just symbolic. It represented something real, something tangible. In the oldest interpretations, this tree represented the principle of natural healing, the idea that nature itself contains everything needed to maintain health and cure disease. The fruit of this tree, mentioned again in Revelation as bearing 12 different kinds of fruit for the healing of nations, points to something profound about diversity in nature and its healing properties. Now here's where things get really fascinating. In Genesis chapter 1 verses 29 through 30, God explicitly tells Adam and Eve that he's given them every seed-bearing plant and every tree that has fruit with seed in it for their food. This isn't just about eating. In the ancient Hebrew understanding, food and medicine weren't separate concepts. They were the same thing. The word for healing and the word for food shared linguistic roots. Your diet was your medicine was your diet. But somewhere along the line, this connection got severed. Medieval translators, working under the authority of religious institutions that had complex relationships with emerging medical guilds and apothecaries, began to interpret these passages more symbolically, less literally. The practical information about plants and healing became metaphor. The metaphor became myth, and the myth became something most people stopped taking seriously as actual health guidance. Let's dig deeper into what was lost. Ancient Hebrew texts outside the canonical Bible, texts like the Book of Jubilees and the Book of Enoch, which were considered scripture by early Christians and Jews but later removed from most biblical canons, contain detailed passages about plant medicine. These texts describe how angels taught early humans which plants to use for specific ailments. They talk about roots, leaves, seeds, and bark. They describe preparation methods. This was practical medical knowledge encoded in religious text. The Book of Jubilees, for instance, explicitly states that after the fall, angels were sent to teach Noah's sons about medicine from plants so they could heal themselves from the diseases that demons were supposedly causing. Whether you believe in the supernatural elements or not, the key point is this. The text is telling us that plant-based medicine was considered divinely ordained knowledge, essential for human survival. Now, why would this information be suppressed or minimized? Follow the money and power. By the medieval period, the Catholic Church had enormous influence over what texts were considered legitimate and how they were interpreted. At the same time, medical practice was becoming professionalized and institutionalized. Physicians wanted to distinguish themselves from herbalists and folk healers, who were often women, by the way, and who relied on precisely the kind of plant knowledge these ancient texts describe. Women healers, using remedies passed down through generations, remedies that likely traced back to the very traditions encoded in these removed biblical texts, were increasingly marginalized. Many were accused of witchcraft. Their knowledge was deemed dangerous, and conveniently the biblical passages that might have legitimized their work were either reinterpreted as purely spiritual allegory or removed entirely from accepted scripture. The result, a population that forgot its healing heritage. Let's talk about what modern science is now discovering. Researchers studying phytochemicals, the active compounds in plants, are finding that ancient peoples somehow knew exactly which plants to use for specific conditions. Willow bark for pain, which contains salicylic acid, the precursor to aspirin. Foxglove for heart conditions, which contains digitalis. Artemisia for malaria. The Madagascar periwinkle for cancer. The list goes on and on. How did ancient people know this? Trial and error certainly played a role, but the consistency of plant medicine across separate ancient cultures suggests something more. It suggests a shared knowledge base, possibly one that traces back to a common source. Could the Genesis account of divinely granted knowledge of plants be a cultural memory of this ancient understanding? Many anthropologists now think so. Here's something that'll really make you think. The Hebrew word used in Genesis for the plants given to humans is esev. This word doesn't just mean any plant. It specifically refers to plants with healing properties, herbs. The translators who rendered this simply as plants or vegetation in English Bibles either didn't understand this nuance or chose to ignore it. Either way, crucial information was lost. When Genesis says God gave us every esev, every healing herb, it's making a specific medical claim. It's saying that for every ailment nature provides a remedy. This principle, called the doctrine of signatures in later European herbal medicine, held that plants resembling parts of the body could heal those parts. Walnuts, which look like brains, for brain health. Beans, shaped like kidneys, for kidney function. Modern research has actually validated some of these connections through phytochemical analysis. But this knowledge became dangerous to established powers. If people could heal themselves with plants growing in their gardens or nearby forests, they didn't need expensive physicians. They didn't need apothecaries. They didn't need the church's intercession for healing through saints and relics. They were, in a word, independent. And independence has never been popular with institutions built on dependence. The removal and reinterpretation of Genesis passages about natural healing had real-world consequences that echo today. Modern medicine, for all its miraculous advances, often treats symptoms rather than causes. It relies heavily on synthetic compounds rather than working with the body's natural healing processes. It has, until very recently, dismissed nutrition and plant medicine as alternative or complementary rather than foundational. Don't misunderstand me. Modern medicine saves lives. Antibiotics, surgery, emergency medicine, these are incredible achievements, but we've lost something too. We've lost the understanding that our first line of defense, our primary health maintenance system, should be the very thing Genesis pointed to. The plants, the whole foods, the natural compounds that our bodies co-evolved with over millions of years. Recent studies in epigenetics are revealing something that would have made perfect sense to ancient peoples but sounds revolutionary today. What you eat doesn't just provide calories and nutrients. It actually turns genes on and off. Compounds in broccoli can activate genes that suppress tumors. Chemicals in berries can switch on genes that reduce inflammation. Your food is literally communicating with your DNA, telling your body how to behave, how to heal, how to protect itself. This is exactly what those removed Genesis passages were teaching. Food is medicine. Medicine is food. The garden provides healing. But when that knowledge was suppressed, we forgot how to eat for health. We began seeing food as merely fuel or pleasure, disconnected from its medicinal properties. Is it any wonder that chronic diseases related to diet, diabetes, heart disease, obesity, autoimmune conditions have exploded in populations eating modern processed foods divorced from nature? Here's another piece that was obscured. In Genesis, the sixth day of creation describes God making humans and immediately establishing their diet, plants. The original human diet, according to Genesis, was entirely plant-based. It wasn't until after the flood in Genesis chapter 9 that meat eating was permitted, and even then with specific restrictions. Ancient Jewish and Christian interpreters saw this progression as movement away from the ideal, a concession to human weakness rather than the optimal design. This isn't about pushing vegetarianism or veganism, though some choose those paths for health. It's about recognizing that the foundation of human nutrition, according to our oldest texts, was always meant to be plants. They were described as primary, as sufficient, as healing. Modern nutritional science, despite decades of trying to prove otherwise, keeps coming back to the same conclusion. The populations that eat the most whole plant foods have the lowest rates of chronic disease. The blue zones, regions where people regularly live past 100 in good health, all share one dietary characteristic. They eat mostly plants. Beans, greens, vegetables, fruits, whole grains, nuts, seeds. This isn't new age thinking. It's ancient wisdom validated by modern epidemiology. It's what was always hiding in plain sight in Genesis, if only we'd kept the full context and meaning of those early chapters. Now let's address the elephant in the room. If this information was really in Genesis, why don't religious leaders talk about it? Some do. There's a growing movement among progressive Christian, Jewish, and even Islamic scholars to reclaim the creation narrative as an ecological and health blueprint. They're going back to original languages, consulting ancient commentaries that predate medieval interpretations, and finding precisely what I'm describing. But institutional religion, like institutional medicine, often resists change. Doctrines become calcified, interpretations become dogma, and anything that wasn't taught by previous generations gets viewed with suspicion, even if it's actually a return to older, more original understandings. The irony is that recovering these removed or obscured Genesis teachings isn't radical innovation. It's conservation. It's preserving what was nearly lost. Think about this timeline. For thousands of years, humans used plant medicine as their primary health care. This knowledge was encoded in religious texts, oral traditions, and cultural practices. Then, over just a few centuries, roughly from the medieval period through the Industrial Revolution, this knowledge was systematically devalued. Religious texts were reinterpreted to remove practical health guidance. Folk healers were persecuted. Indigenous plant knowledge was dismissed as superstition. But the plants never stopped working. Aspirin still comes from willow bark chemistry. Chemotherapy drugs still derive from plant compounds. Over 40% of modern pharmaceuticals are based on molecules first discovered in plants. We didn't move beyond plant medicine. We just complicated it, patented it, and made it expensive. Then we forgot we got it from the garden in the first place. Here's what I think really happened. Genesis and similar creation accounts from other cultures preserved ancient medical knowledge in story form. As these stories were copied and translated over millennia, some translators understood the practical implications and kept them. Others, influenced by changing social structures, professional medicine, and institutional religion, didn't see the value or actively wanted to suppress this democratized health knowledge, so it faded. But it never completely disappeared. Today, we're experiencing a renaissance of interest in exactly these topics. Functional medicine doctors are prescribing food as medicine. Researchers are studying traditional herbal remedies and finding them remarkably effective. People are growing medicinal herb gardens. We're rediscovering, often without realizing it, the very principles that were encoded in those Genesis passages about the garden, the plants, and the tree of life. So what does this mean for you practically? It means that the secret to preventing and even revering many modern diseases might be as simple as returning to the dietary pattern described in Genesis. Whole plant foods, minimally processed, eaten in variety, just as the text describes, every seed-bearing plant, every tree with fruit. It means your grocery choices are medical choices. Your garden is your pharmacy. It means questioning the conventional separation between food and medicine. When you eat berries, you're not just enjoying a snack. You're consuming powerful anti-inflammatory and antioxidant compounds that protect your cells. When you eat leafy greens, you're getting compounds that support detoxification and reduce cancer risk. When you eat beans and whole grains, you're feeding beneficial gut bacteria that influence everything from mood to immune function. This isn't about being perfect or following rigid rules. The Genesis account describes abundance and diversity, not restriction. It describes a garden full of different plants, each with different properties. The modern equivalent is eating a wide variety of colorful plant foods, not stressing about exact quantities or eliminating entire food groups, but making plants the foundation and eating them in forms as close to how they grow as possible. What's fascinating is that when people do this, when they actually structure their diet around whole plant foods the way Genesis originally described, chronic diseases often improve dramatically. Type 2 diabetes goes into remission, blood pressure normalizes, inflammation markers drop, excess weight comes off, energy increases. It's not magic. It's biology working the way it was designed to work, fueled by the foods it was designed to use. The deliberate removal or obscuring of this information from Genesis wasn't just an academic issue. It had real consequences. It disconnected us from our healing heritage. It made us dependent on external authorities for health instead of empowering us with knowledge. It contributed to epidemics of preventable disease. But the good news is that this knowledge is being recovered. You now have access to both the ancient wisdom and the modern science that validates it. So here's my challenge to you. Go back and read Genesis chapters 1 and 2 with fresh eyes. Look for every mention of plants, food, and the garden. Ask yourself what practical health information might be encoded there. Then take one small step. Add more whole plant foods to your diet. Start a small herb garden. Learn about one medicinal plant. Reconnect with the healing power that was always meant to be yours. The secret that was removed from Genesis is actually beautifully simple. Nature heals. The plants are medicine. Your body knows what to do with whole foods because you co-evolved together. Disease isn't an inevitable part of aging. It's often the result of straying too far from the original design, the original diet, the original relationship with the living world that Genesis described. This understanding changes everything. It shifts you from passive patient to active participant in your health. It moves you from dependence on pharmaceutical interventions for lifestyle diseases to prevention through nutrition. It reconnects you with thousands of years of wisdom that's been validated by cutting-edge science. And it all starts with recognizing that what was removed from Genesis wasn't removed because it was false, but perhaps because it was too true, too empowering, too threatening to systems built on your dependence. The tree of life is still offering its fruit. The garden is still growing. The healing is still available. You just have to know where to look, and now you do. I want to leave you with something to really sit with, because understanding this isn't just intellectual exercise. This is about reclaiming your power over your own health and recognizing patterns that have shaped human civilization for centuries. When you look at the suppression of this knowledge, you start to see how information control has always been a tool of power. Those who control what people know, what they believe is possible, what they're allowed to think is real, those people control behavior. They control dependence. They control entire societies. The removal of plant medicine from our collective consciousness wasn't unique to biblical translation. It happened across cultures wherever institutional power structures wanted to monopolize health and healing. Indigenous peoples worldwide had comprehensive pharmacopoeias based on local plants, knowledge accumulated over thousands of years of careful observation and experimentation. When colonizers arrived, they didn't just take land and resources, they systematically devalued this knowledge. They called it witchcraft, superstition, primitive ignorance. Yet when they returned home, they brought back the plants themselves, and European scientists studied them, patented them, and profited from them, while the original knowledge keepers received nothing. This pattern repeats itself because it's profitable. A population that understands nutrition as medicine is a population that doesn't need as many doctor visits, pharmaceutical prescriptions, or medical interventions. It's a population empowered by self-knowledge. But a population that sees health as something only professionals can provide, something requiring constant medical supervision and intervention, that's a population that generates revenue. That's a market. That's control. I'm not saying this cynically or suggesting all medical professionals are motivated by greed. Most genuinely want to help people. But they operate within systems that were designed to separate you from your own healing power, and those systems have financial incentives that don't always align with your well-being. The fact that the richest healthcare system in the world, spending more per capita than any other nation, produces some of the sickest populations compared to developed nations should tell you something. We're treating disease, not building health, and the difference is profound. When you eat for health, when you choose whole plant foods, when you move your body regularly, when you sleep well, when you manage stress, when you connect with community and purpose, you're not just living healthier. You're practicing a form of autonomy. You're saying no to dependence and yes to self-determination. This is probably why reclaiming Genesis knowledge feels revolutionary even though it's ancient. It's revolutionary because it empowers you. The beautiful irony is that this shift doesn't require rejecting modern medicine. It means using it properly, as emergency care and acute intervention for serious conditions, while building a foundation of health so robust that you need it rarely. It means partnership between ancient wisdom and modern science. It means understanding that your body has an intelligence, a healing capacity that's been refined over millions of years of evolution. Your job is to support that intelligence, not override it with processed foods and pharmaceutical approaches to lifestyle diseases. Think about what happens in your body when you eat a whole food plant-based diet. Your gut microbiome shifts within days. Trillions of beneficial bacteria that had been starved by processed foods suddenly flourish. These bacteria produce compounds that reduce inflammation, support immune function, manufacture neurotransmitters that affect mood, and communicate with your brain in ways science is just beginning to understand. It's not metaphorical to say that your gut health becomes your mental health, your immune health, your longevity. The Genesis account of a garden full of different plants speaks directly to this. Diversity of plants means diversity of microbiota, means resilience and health. When you eat colorful vegetables, you're consuming thousands of phytonutrients that your body uses in ways we're still discovering. Sulforaphane from broccoli, anthocyanins from berries, polyphenols from grapes and tea, carotenoids from orange and red vegetables. Each one has multiple mechanisms of action in your body. They're not vitamins in the traditional sense that your body stores them for later use. They're signals, they're information. They're instructions telling your genes how to express themselves, how to protect you, how to repair damage. This is the real secret that was in Genesis all along. The plants aren't just fuel, they're communication, they're medicine. They're the interface between the natural world and your body. When you eat them, you're not just getting calories and fiber. You're receiving millions of years of accumulated plant wisdom, the plant's own defense strategies against disease, its own repair mechanisms now working in your body. You're literally eating plants that evolved to be medicine, and your body recognizes them as such. The reason processed foods make you sick isn't mysterious. They're stripped of this information. They're missing the fiber, the phytonutrients, the living enzymes, the bacteria, the complexity. What's left is essentially dead matter shaped to be addictive through salt, sugar, and fat. It provides calories but no real information. Your body receives empty signals. Your microbiota starves. Your genes receive instructions to store energy and prepare for scarcity even though you're eating constantly. Of course you get sick. Your body isn't getting what it needs to function properly. When you return to whole foods, you're not depriving yourself. You're finally feeding yourself properly. The cravings for processed foods fade as your taste buds recalibrate and your nutritional needs are actually met. The fatigue lifts because your body isn't spending energy digesting dead food and managing inflammation. The mental fog clears because your gut microbiota is producing the compounds your brain needs to function. This isn't willpower. This is biology responding to proper input. Here's what I want you to understand about the removal of this knowledge from Genesis and other texts. It wasn't just about medicine. It was about humanity's relationship with the earth. When you understand plants as medicine, as gifts, as intelligence embedded in nature, you relate to the natural world differently. You see yourself as part of it, dependent on it, responsible to it. You can't abuse an ecosystem that you understand as your provider and your healer. You can't poison water that you drink from. You can't cut down forests that contain your medicine. But when you separate health from nature, when you're taught that healing comes from laboratories and hospitals, from human expertise applied against nature rather than in harmony with it, then nature becomes just a resource to extract from. The earth becomes a commodity. The soil becomes a medium for chemicals. The plants become raw materials for industrial processing. This worldview has consequences that extend far beyond individual health into environmental catastrophe. The separation was complete and total. Genesis didn't just lose its medical knowledge. We lost our wisdom about living in reciprocity with nature. Reconnecting with plant-based health is therefore more than a diet change. It's a spiritual realignment. It's choosing to live in a way that acknowledges our interdependence with the natural world. It's honoring the intelligence of nature and the body. It's recognizing that we're not separate from nature trying to conquer it, but part of nature trying to live in balance with it. This is what every ancient culture understood. This is what Genesis was teaching. This is what we're recovering. The exciting part is that this recovery is accelerating. Medical schools are adding nutrition education. Research universities are studying phytochemicals and ethnobotany seriously. Hospitals are installing gardens. Doctors are prescribing plant-based diets for disease reversal. Indigenous knowledge keepers are being consulted and respected. The artificial separation is beginning to heal. The removal is being reversed, not through rewriting texts, but through validation and rediscovery. You don't need to wait for institutions to change to benefit from this. You can start today. You can read the labels on your food and choose differently. You can grow a few plants even in containers on a balcony. You can learn the healing properties of common plants. You can examine your relationship with food and see it as medicine rather than entertainment or comfort. You can trust your body's wisdom more than external authorities. These small choices compound. The secret wasn't really secret. It was always there, encoded in the oldest texts, confirmed by the longest-lived cultures, validated by modern science. It was just obscured, written out, translated away, reinterpreted into metaphor. But wisdom has a way of persisting. Truth keeps surfacing. The healing is always available if you know where to look. Genesis points us there. Science confirms it. Your own body knows it. Trust that.